Hello. All right, welcome. This is our final assignment, right? Fighting the Civil War. I'm going to be a little bit more vague on this one because not only am I not particularly prepared to give an outline of the entire war, as far as all my resources here, all my sources here with me, but also I want this to be a unique assignment, kind of like the War of 1812, whereby you guys do some studying yourselves, right, on the subject that you're doing. So I'm not just being lazy. I want this to be a different type of assignment. The others are strictly argumentative. I don't ask for you to look up anything supplemental to the argumentative sections themselves. I mean, I haven't even asked for even of the textbook. But on this, right, I want it to be more of a kind of a research slash assignment, argumentative assignment. Okay. And so you're just going to choose one of the questions. We're going to go over the questions, make sure that you're aware of what I'm asking. Okay. And so let me get the rest of the names on here. And then on Thursday, we will we'll do test 3, and then we're done, you guys. You guys have made it. Congratulations. So hang in there. All right. I believe I have all of them. Let's see here. 1, 2. Okay, I do. I have all 9 of your names. So let's go ahead and share the screen. So what we're looking at here, okay? Should you choose number 1? So most of my studying, I've not read the famous Shelby Foote multi-volume. I just haven't gotten around to reading that. Talk about detail from what I hear and what I've read about his volume. But I have read Battle Cry of Freedom by James McPherson, and a lot of it comes from that book. All right, so let's see here. Defend or refute historian James McPherson's claim that the Union's loss at the First Battle of Bull Run was a blessing in disguise, and that it convinced the leaders of the U.S. government and of the Northern Armed Forces to make a greater effort to galvanize all resources in fighting a long, bloody war. All right. And so clearly in this book, he makes that contention. You don't have to get the book to study this. Okay. I'm trying to find the new name. Okay. I think I just found it. Let's see here. So at any rate. All right. Okay. And so, let's see here. So what you would do is you would look up you could look up, if you choose number 1, the cabinet. Look at the Secretary of War. The Secretary of War was replaced about a year and a half into the war, and supposedly a lot more logistical work was done in arming and preparing logistically the Union Army to fight this 4-year war against the South, the 11 states of the Confederacy. Well, 11 and a half. Missouri had an exile government connected to the Confederacy as well. So at any rate, so you could look into that, into the statistics of that. You could look into also McClellan in particular, George B. McClellan. McClellan supposedly, his routines, the manner by which he had the men train and prepare for battle became almost legendary. And so you could look up those 2 things just even to begin with. And then, of course, you could find lots of sources on the inadequacies of the South, how they ran out of logistical things. You have press coverage contending that the South did not prepare very well for battles. And so you have quotes from multiple Southern as well as Northern press coverage of that. And it's kind of simplistic causation here, but he's contending, right, that because the South did so well in the opening battles, they had a cultural understanding that they came from gentry class, right? And they were fighting a predominantly bourgeois northern population. And the bourgeois population were associated with street peddlers and merchants and factory workers and entrepreneurs, people with their own little shops and businesses, etc., who didn't own a gun prior to this war. And the South was proud of its gentry past, of hunting and dueling, etc., right? And that it was a way of life to handle a gun down in the South. And so you see that play a role in McPherson's book as far as the South getting a little bit arrogant and complacent from its early victories, and not to mention its superiority in officers. When you look at Robert E. Lee, when you look at Stonewall Jackson, and some of these generals in the South, especially early in the war, they outsmarted the Union leaders time and time again. So to what extent was it a blessing in disguise for the Union to do poorly at the beginning, to logistically get everything under their Secretary of War organized, under leaders like McClellan to just train, and to create this culture, right? This almost fatalistic culture in the North, that this is going to be a long, bloody, drawn out war, but we're not going to quit. And we're going to outlast our opponent, right? In a war of attrition, who outlasts whom, okay? So think about that one if you want to choose that one. Then we have number 2, contingency, like the butterfly effect, like the what ifs, right? Contingency in history deals with the possibility of events turning in an entirely different direction had a certain variable been different. Demonstrate how the South or the Confederacy may have won the Civil War had a variable of your choosing been different. For example, a foreign alliance with Great Britain, which actually almost happened, a larger Southern population, or more participation in the Confederacy by the border states. Again, McPherson's book, I don't expect you to get a hold of that, but you might be able to find some online information from that book. States the importance of the border states and how many resources came from them alone. So like Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri. And they were literally caught between the North and South and trying to make a decision as to which side to choose. A more powerful Confederate Navy, because I think you'll find in the textbook, the U.S. Navy was rather superior. Yes, you had the famous, ironclad battles in the South, had a powerful ironclad boat that became famous, but that we're talking about one boat, the USS Virginia, the Merrimack, etc. But at any rate, when you look at the naval battles and the naval history, it was a bit one-sided for the North. So what if that had been different? Or victory via some change in a key battle, like Antietam, which was kind of a stalemate. If you look up the Battle of Antietam and see how it could have gone differently. Gettysburg at the famous left and right flanks, the South almost succeeding in enveloping the left and the right flank of the Union line in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. You have Cemetery Ridge, Culp's Hill, and other areas that became famous because the South almost got them, almost captured them, the whole what if thing, right? And I don't know how you pronunciate this guy. I've read a little bit on him, but Jubal Early. Look up his opportunity to march on the Capitol, on Washington, D.C., and he didn't do it, okay? And then if other people had fought on the other side, etc. And remember also, I said here, I kind of limited it in more of a manner than I had initially intended. You don't have to change it if you choose number 2, the what ifs, to the South winning. You could also change it to the North being able to win much more quickly, much more efficiently than happened in this 4-year drawn out war. All right, but explain to me why, if you choose number 2, why this single variable, or maybe a couple variables, had they been different, history would have gone in a different direction. So I was hoping you could have some fun with that one if you choose number two, because it's not so much as one answer is as good as another, but it's not as if there are exact, accurate, and inaccurate, true and false answers to this. There's some subjectivity involved, right? But of course, I want you to logically defend why and how that variable or those couple variables would have made events turn in a different direction. Okay, so that's number two. Number three, how successfully did the Negro soldiers, as they were called, of the 54th Regiment win respect for and trust in African-American soldiers in the future? And they weren't the only ones, but they seem to have received the most publicity, and they also embodied the capacity of Black men in the eyes and estimation of that white generation at that time period, arguably, according to sources I've read, more keenly, because they were comprised of free men who had never been slaves. And so to some people, they felt like the slaves had already been broken, their spirits had already been broken. They wouldn't be, for several reasons, therefore, they wouldn't be trustworthy soldiers. But the 54th, they were freedmen almost entirely. Of course, you had a few exceptions, but primarily they had been free before fighting. So to that generation, they embodied the natural, uninhibited capacity of a Black man to be able to defend the country and to fight loyally and stand up for the flag, etc. So if you look up the 54th Regiment, you find that it's almost a case like martyrdom. They fought and lost at Fort Wagner, Wagner in South Carolina. But the manner by which they went into a semi-suicidal situation and they showed such courage. You could find quotes from rebel soldiers praising white rebel Confederates, pretty much giving a great compliment to these Black men as far as how brave they were and how bravely they fought. Of course, the New York Tribune and other really big newspapers, you could look at articles they wrote on the 54th Regiment and their courage and their loyalty to the country, et cetera, and their worthiness as possible future citizens. And of course, you had the 1st and 2nd Carolina colored regiments. You had another regiment was the 1st Kansas colored regiment. You could look into those as well if you wanted to. All of them fought bravely and received a lot of attention. But I felt like I should choose just one of them instead of being generic with African-American soldiers, which I don't know if this was the wisest decision, but I went ahead and chose the 54th. So you could look up the 1st and 2nd South Carolina and the 1st Kansas as well if you wanted to. But note, you're looking at the role that they played because it wasn't very far in the future. That same year, we're talking about a lot happened in 1863, right in the middle of the war. The Emancipation Proclamation right off the bat, the Gettysburg Address containing that we were fighting for a new birth of freedom, for an enlightened government of, by, and for the people. And, the whole new birth of freedom is contested to this day, what exactly Lincoln meant by that. But to a lot of people, they foresaw the 13th Amendment of abolishing slavery and giving a whole new demographic, Black men, enfranchisement or citizenship rights. And so at any rate, you have there in July, the fightings at Fort Wagner against with the 54th Regiment. You have that same summer of 1863, the 1st Kansas and the 1st and 2nd South Carolina units fighting and getting a lot of press coverage. And then you also have a lot of attention with the taking of, by July 4th, of Vicksburg. When Vicksburg was taken on the Mississippi River, it brought about the exodus of a lot of slaves from southern plantations who fled to the Union Army for freedom, right, to get away from their masters. And they began developing contraband camps. And so that might be something you want to look into if you choose number 3. Look up contraband camps and look how the Union, about this time, is it a coincidence? In the summer and fall of 1863, they began drafting and equipping the young Black men in these contraband camps. So now we're not just talking like the 54th freedmen. We're talking about slaves, runaway slaves. Now they're arming them and beginning to utilize their work on the battlefield. All right. And so you could look up that. You could look up Congress and Frederick Douglass, Governor John Andrew of Massachusetts were very vocal and putting forth the merit of Black soldiers and the need for Black soldiers. You could look up a senator named George Julian, and George Julian emphasized the military necessity of using runaway slaves and Black men as soldiers, and how it could constitute the tipping point, right? Because they seem to have been fighting at a long bloody draw, if you will, and in saying that the Black men would make all the difference in who was going to win, and it would be foolish for the Union not to use them. So look into that if you're interested. That's option number 3. Then number 4, in light of the carnage of the battles of Shiloh and the battle of the battles of the Wilderness, and Grant's directives to Philip Sheridan in the Shenandoah Valley, and to William Tecumseh Sherman in the Deep South, right, to momentarily disregard the protocols of war, should present historians revoke the mantle of war hero from Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, so Ulysses Grant, he's credited for finally having a leader of the Army of the Potomac, because remember the Washington D.C. was on the Potomac River. So the Army of the Potomac is the Union Army, the Northern Army that represents the United States, right? Trying to get the 11 and a half Southern states to force to come back into the United States. So he wins, right? We obviously know that. And we know also that he was more aggressive than his predecessors, almost without an exception. There were a couple of predecessors that were about as aggressive in their tactics and so forth, but they didn't last very long. Some were removed, like Joseph Hooker, and then others who probably would have led the army, like a guy named Leon, were killed. And so we'll never know. So Grant ends up taking control of the Army of the Potomac, but it was largely from his reputation. If you look at his fighting, his decisiveness at Forts Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee, he quasi fought without permission. He was waiting to get permission to fight and attack those forts. And it's argumentative whether he received that confirmation or not, and went ahead and attacked anyway. He was aggressive. Shiloh was an avoidable battle, and it was very bloody. And he kept moving the soldiers forward until they had this clash at Shiloh. And so he had some superiors that wanted him to be removed, saying that he was too aggressive and he was getting our men, putting too many of our boys in danger. But the first or second night of the Battle of Shiloh, his adjutant told him, Mr. Grant, should we offer terms of surrender? And he said, no, tomorrow morning we're going to get up and we're going to whip him. He had that indefatigable tenacity, that never say die outlook. And he's a very intriguing guy when you read a biography on him. And so at any rate, he's just this quiet, unassuming guy who failed in so many things in his life, and may have had a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and had it out for Robert E. Lee, who he called the Golden Boy, and wanted to defeat him. In the Battle of the Wilderness, there were a couple times whereby people contended that he was walking his men into a trap. And he has a very, almost Machiavellian quote whereby he says, very well, I have more men. Like, okay, I'm probably leading some of my boys to death, but I'm still bringing about my long-term goal of trapping Lee. So he might beat me tomorrow. He might have a trap for me, but I have 3 times the men and I'm going to eventually trap him, which actually kind of did happen by the end of the war. And so at any rate, right, so to his critics, he was callous, he was unfeeling. He had no qualms with using his men as cannon fodder, and he could be even brutal. At Vicksburg, he had them cut off water supplies. He had them go to the bathroom and their sources of water to the people of that city. He didn't mess around. And so at any rate, but what he also did is there were protocols of war that were already being circulated and followed by the Union Army, as far as, it's called just war theory, coming from the Catholic Church in the first centuries AD and evolving into the Geneva Conventions, right? By this time, or just actually just a generation after this, during the Crimean War in Europe and in Eurasia. So at any rate, he had them disregard some of the protocols of war. For instance, right, trying to get resources. He said, it's imperative that I trap Lee, and we have to be as quick and efficient in moving our army as possible. So therefore, he told his men, commandeer resources in the South as you need them. So basically go into Southern plantations and take food for your soldiers, take, necessary things. And that was against the protocols of war, to confiscate anything from civilians. And so, like I said, very controversial, right? So he has his men do that. He even gave kind of a blank check to William Tecumseh Sherman, as we'll get to in the 5th question. And William Tecumseh Sherman did even more questionable things as far as violations of the protocols of international warfare, of the rules of international warfare. So at any rate, to what extent should we consider revoking that mantle of so many generations praising this man? And of course, right, the contention, the court history contention is war is hell. And you sometimes you got to take your gloves off and get your hands dirty in winning. And he did what was necessary, albeit in ugly fashion, but he did what was necessary. So at any rate, just look into that. Do some basic research into Ulysses S. Grant. Maybe look up protocols of war or articles of war, and you should be able to find cases in which he violated those, okay, as the Union commander of the Army of the Potomac. And then more specifically, right, his right-hand man, William Tecumseh Sherman. Consider the context of Civil War realities and of what William Tecumseh Sherman experienced. Could and should one defend to any degree the actions of William Tecumseh Sherman and his Union soldiers in the Deep South? So for instance, when you look at a biography of him, it's quite a story of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He taught at West Point, and when the war broke out, people there, his students and other professors at West Point, at this military academy for the US, they made quick decisions as to whose side they were going to be on. And an overwhelming majority of the West Point cadets and officers chose the South. Most of them were from the South. And they said he literally wept and hugged them one by one, knowing that he was going to have to fight against them because of he's an Ohio man and he was loyal to the Union. And so you look at the First Battle of Bull Run. He hesitated when he recognized a West Point companion, and his hesitation cost lives. He allowed the man to fire first and to fire artillery into his regiment, and it killed a lot of his men. He also at Shiloh was arguably in the very worst part of the fighting at the Battle of Shiloh by accident or just bad luck, and was surrounded, almost surrendered more than once. And he saw a lot of bloody, ugly fighting. He went through deep depression, even contemplated suicide. They put him in a high-ranking desk job in Tennessee, and they said he began to go mad. He began to go a little crazy. He was paranoid. He would have bouts of depression, and fatalistically said that they were surrounded by nothing but enemies in the border states, and that this war was never going to end unless they got vicious, because nothing short of viciousness would break the will of the stubborn Southerners. And so at any rate, something in him eventually snaps, and his men are down into the South. And what's ironic is early on in going down into the South, one of his men stole a cotton gin from a plantation. He wrote his man up and cited the Articles of War and stated that he was to be punished, and that cotton gin was to be given back, returned to its rightful owner. So such was his, his attention for detail and wanting to follow the rules. But as his men go through the South, right, they began with one thing that happened quite often, evidently, according to the primary sources, is his cavalrymen. They would go into Southern towns, and his cavalrymen would experience sniping, and people without drawing up a regimental line and fighting like gentlemen against the Union soldiers. They would hide in windows of buildings, etc., oftentimes not even wearing a Confederate uniform. And they would snipe and shoot and kill some of his prime cavalry officers. And so finally something in him snapped, and he told one of his men, he said, the next city we go into, if they begin sniping my men, he says, I want you to pick 100 people randomly from the city. I want you to have them brought out before everybody. If no one has information after a certain number of hours, I want you to threaten to execute those 100 civilian people in front of their city brethren. Like, wow, this guy's, he's not messing around anymore. And then he tore up railroad tracks and telegraph wires. He came in and had his men take what they wanted from Southern plantations. And then sometimes just for spite, as they were leaving, they would burn the plantations to the ground. He was famous for burning Atlanta, virtually the entire city and all the major edifices of that city, burning Atlanta to the ground because of the rebellion of the Atlanta people when his army came into the city. And so, wow, huh? And so this guy, if he would have been in the South, they may have executed him at the end of the war for war crimes, like the Fort Pillow massacre of the Southerners killing Black soldiers and not allowing them to surrender, and prisoners of war. And so at any rate, but he happened to be on the winning side, so he was never punished. But again, if you look into the circumstances, those who try to support him, try to defend him, contend that he initially was nothing like this, but that events and forces outside himself and of course within himself began to morph him into this quasi monster that he became by the end of the war. And they contended that Southern women would tell their children, their sons, when they'd misbehave, I'm going to get Sherman after you. Such as the extent that he had become the boogeyman down in the South for burning things to the ground. And again, as far as the idea of a double standard, look at Southerners who did similar things. Look up a guy named William Quantrill, Quantrill. Look up his protege, Bloody Bill Anderson. And they would go through the border states, particularly Missouri, and if they found civilians that were pro-Yankees, they would kill them on the spot. They would rob them and kill them. And they destroyed railroads, and they blew up ships and blew up railroads that they knew were transporting Union soldiers, and engaged in guerrilla warfare, right? That we get the term from the Spanish, guerra is war. Guerrilla is little warfare, where you don't follow the Articles of War, but you fight as would a David would against a Goliath. You hit him when he's not looking. You don't wear a uniform and attack his supply lines. You blow up his infrastructure. If you have to, you kill civilians or non-combatants who aren't wearing soldier uniforms and carrying guns. And so at any rate, I find these last two subjects, as far as biographies go, about as interesting as they come in U.S. history. Both Ulysses Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman. All right, so are there any questions? Any questions as far as what I'm asking you to do and choosing one of these topics?
As far as the topics go, is it just based on the people you're listing?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It just depends on which number you choose, Melissa. But yeah, a lot of them, as you notice, I kind of did great man history, didn't I? And remember, with great man history, it doesn't, and you're not intending that the person is great morally. You're saying that this person was in such a great position of power and made such decisions and had such a personality that he or she single-handedly turned events into the direction that they went, right? And so I did do a lot of great man history. 4 and 5 are obvious cases of that. 3, not so much. 3, I intended to be broader than that. Of course, you could look up, key individuals like, Robert Gould Shaw, who led the 54th Regiment, a Medal of Honor recipient, a Black soldier. You could find some great man stuff, the role of Frederick Douglass or John Andrew. But number 3 was not intended to be great man history. That was intended to be a little bit broader. But nevertheless, you're kind of focusing on the role of one regiment and its heroic demise, if you will. Number 2 is intended to be very open. You could absolutely adhere to great man history as far as, picking a particular leader of the South or North and have had things gone differently or been on the other side. So you could go the great man history route, but you don't have to, right? You could focus instead on something broader than an individual, on a battle, on an opportunity that was lost by the South, for instance, if one thing or another had been just a little different. So I meant number 2 to be a little bit broader than great man history. And number 1, I intended to be broader than great man history as well, is looking at the Union government and the Union Army themselves, right, as an entire entity, and how they, after early losses like Bull Run, yeah, so yes, I have a raised hand, please.
Hi, is it gonna be double space or can it be single space? You said 2 pages, correct?
Yes, I intended it to be double spaced.
Okay.
So just note that as far as the length of it, yeah, just for a few days to be able to only have a few days to do this. Yeah, a couple pages double spaced is enough for me.
Okay.
But I don't sweat the small stuff either, though, Narayan. If you end up forgetting and putting it single space and it's at least a page, to me that's equivalent of 2 double spaced pages, you're fine.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome. All right, anyone else? All right, well, I know this meeting wasn't very long, but that's all I have to share, really. So just don't second guess yourself. By all means, pick whichever one elicits the most interest to you, where you think that your brain is already contemplating an answer to that question, right? Or a route that you could take to find an answer to that question. But once you do, just run with it, and maybe even have a little bit of enjoyment from it. Hopefully you learn some stuff in your research, but don't overthink it, okay? Just do your best. And this constitutes your last assignment. And so when we meet on Thursday, we'll go over test 3, and that's it, you guys. You guys have made it. I'm proud
Wow.
of you. Yeah, I'm proud of you.
I had a question really quick, Professor.
Sure.
For number one, how it says to defend or refute James McPherson's claim, is that in the book or is that actually come from like his own book?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sorry. I probably should have done something more to the directly in line with our textbook. But no, it's in his book.
Okay,
But while it's not emphasized to the same degree in our book, I do think that you do find a little bit of that logic in ours as well,
okay.
in our textbook as well. Don't quote me for sure, but if I could recall, it's been a while since I've read the chapter. But I think there is something along those lines written in our textbook as well.
Yeah, I know there's a little section in there that talks about, I think it's around page 384. Is what I was looking at yesterday. But I wasn't sure because I didn't see anything about James McPherson in general. So I was like, let me just make sure.
Yeah, it probably doesn't quote James McPherson.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So I
It's
didn't
okay.
mean to throw anybody off by getting that specific about just one historian's book. But yeah, I just quote him because, like I said, I like that book and I've read it a couple times and he highly emphasizes that point.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All
And
right,
then
thank
also,
you.
which if you wanted to look at with number one, which you might find relevant to the textbook, is the anaconda plan, like the anaconda snake. The idea of hitting the South in as many places simultaneously as possible to maximize and take advantage of the North's superiority in men. Because according to McPherson's book and our textbook, there was almost a 3-to-1 ratio, almost a 3-to-1 advantage of more Union men fighting than Confederate or Southern men. And so I know the textbook covers that with the Anaconda Plan, whereby President Lincoln tried to convince McClellan, hey, why don't we hit them in as many places and far out disparate regions simultaneously as possible, and because it'll spread them too thinly, right? Because they don't have enough men to fight all of our guys everywhere. And it's kind of ironic that McClellan wouldn't do it. And when you look later on, when Grant helps win the war for the North, that's almost precisely what he did. Is he had people hitting several places simultaneously, whereby the South could not use its efficiency so well, its quickness with its cavalry, and putting men as needed, right, as backups to help wherever the battle was. Now there are just too many places all at once. They had to pick and choose and decide places that they couldn't help because they just didn't have enough people. And for the North to be able to do that and implement the Anaconda Plan, they had to raise an army. They had to get more aggressive with their drafts, right, and drafting the men. They had to get more logistically organized and getting guns and uniforms and shoes and bullets and artillery, right, and horses for the Union to use. They had to train them like McClellan did, just ad nauseum throughout the day, several days a week, and so forth. So to me, it's kind of tied to the Anaconda Plan. I think number one is that the North realized, you know what, this is going to be a war of attrition, a war of outlasting. We got to outlast the South, and there's no reason for us not to be able to outlast the South because we have a superiority in resources.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No problem. All right, anybody else? Lady, could you unmute yourself, hon? I see you speaking, but I can't hear
Okay.
you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So on the assignments, I turned in the one on the 5th, on the 8th. I got confused. So now my assignment on the 5th, it's late. It's on I turned it in on the 6th when I noticed that I made a mistake. I just want to let you know.
Oh, okay. So you did a subsequent assignment that was due later first?
I no
Okay.
no no. I did my assignment. The one is turning on the 5th, but instead of turning it on the 5th, I turned it on the assignment that was due on the 8th. So I got confused.
Oh, okay.
So I noticed that on the 6th. So I was like, oh God, I put it on the wrong assignment. So I turned it in the one on the 6th, and I did the one on the 8th on the 8th.
Okay. That's
So
okay.
now it looks like it's late, but I just made a mistake and put it into the wrong assignment.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. All right. Yeah, let me see here. Let me mark that down.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you.
You're very
Bye-bye.
welcome. Take care.
You
All
too.
right. So anybody else?
Is this assignment due tomorrow, right? Or is it today?
It is, oh gosh. Let's see here. Oh, it's hard to do that. Let's see here. Let's see. So it's due tomorrow. It's due tomorrow night.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
All right. Narayan, did you have a question? So I see your symbolic hand up. All right, so anyone else? Anyone else before we say goodbye for today?
Mr. C, we are gonna meet on Thursday.
We are for
Okay.
one last time, and we're gonna go over test 3. And you guys are gonna ace it. You're gonna do well on it.
Okay, thanks so much.
You're
Have a good
welcome.
day.
You too. All right, so if that's all, you guys, I'll go ahead and bid you adieu. And I hope to see you Thursday for our final meeting, Zoom meeting, and we'll cover test 3. So good luck. This is due tomorrow night at midnight, okay?
I have one more question, Professor.
Sure.
For the grading, as far as the tests and quizzes go, are you gonna drop like the lowest one, or how do you do that?
No, I
Is
mean,
it
to
just
be
all of
honest,
it?
I'm not philosophically against dropping your lowest one, but I just haven't really, it hasn't occurred to me to do that. So to be honest, I haven't dropped the lowest in a while. I think I've been convinced by students, persuaded to do so on occasion in the past, but it's been a while since I've done that. Also, remember quiz 4, it defaults for each question to be only worth 1 point. And on quiz number 4, I failed to switch that to 5 points each.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. So it
yeah.
shows out of 25.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, you get 4 out of 5. You did not get 4 out of 25.
Okay.
Instead, right, I will multiply your score by 5. So if you got
Okay.
4, then you really got 20 out of 25. And I promise that will be the case on my Excel sheet where it counts, where your grade is computed.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Okay, so if there isn't anything else, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye. You guys have a great day, okay? Hang in there. This is your last assignment. Bye-bye.